Well, hello once again. My name is Dan-Ahlborn, and you are listening to the True Grace Podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to understanding the true meaning of grace and, more importantly, your identity within the new covenant of Jesus Christ. And this week, we are blessed to have another speaker, teacher, pastor with us. His name is Zach Maldonado. He has a true passion to proclaim the gospel of grace and really help people believe that the cross worked. In fact, he actually wrote a book named that, called The Cross Work. It came out the beginning of this year, and you can find it on Amazon or I'm sure any other place you get your books. And Zach, we are very happy to have you with us this morning. Good morning, man.
Good morning, Dan. Thank you so much for having me, man. This is such an awesome podcast, and I just love being able to talk with someone who loves Jesus and the grace of God as much as me. So thank you.
Oh, man, absolutely. And I've shared the story a lot. It's something that, you know, when you have an understanding of grace, you do things from such a different perspective. It's not out of duty. It's out of desire and a love that you have for the Lord. And that's really the birthing of this podcast. And again, I consider it an honor to sit here and talk with other believers in Christ, man, and just have a great conversation about grace itself. Now, one of the things I like to do on the podcast is I like to hear other people's journey to grace. I've shared with our audience my journey in the past. But, you know, many of us have not come from a straight grace background. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you came to knowing grace, Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, I grew up in a very competitive family. I have a twin sister. I have older brothers and sisters, and we were all very involved in sports and activities. And whether it was academics or sports, we were all very competitive. And so for me, I grew up in this a very workaholic type family and lifestyle. And so I took that same attitude into my Christian life. And I thought that God was a sort of a coach, sort of a goal, sort of this old man in the sky who I had to work to please, and yet he was never pleased enough. And so in that way, he was always displeased with me. He wasn't proud. There was always more I could do. What I did was never enough. And so that's how I lived the Christian life. I could never be good enough. I was never good enough. I was just this lowly person who was just on the treadmill of Christianity, trying my best to please a God that seemingly could never be pleased. And that caused me to burn out and just completely walk away from God in high school. And that resulted in, you know, years of just living a lifestyle that was bad and worldly. And it wasn't until really my senior year of high school that I came to know and understand God's grace and really see the big thing for me that really just changed my life was the fact that God was pleased with me apart from what I did.
Yeah,
He was pleased with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that he considered me the righteousness of God. And so, you know, as many like to say, it took many years of really unlearning things more than learning things. And, you know, through the help of Andrew Farley and some other people, I really came to grasp this idea, this concept that not only am I saved by grace alone, but everything is by grace alone.
Amen.
And it's all about Jesus and what he's done. And man, it's so freeing, as you noted in the beginning of this show, that it changes everything. You know, you mentioned it's no longer a place of duty. And as I like to say, you know, when you do too much duty, it just gets messy, Dan. It just gets messy. And
that's good, Zach. I like that.
You know, and many say, we don't preach a do message, and I agree, because a do message, Dan, is very stinky. Let me tell you.
Amen.
And that's
brother.
a lot of do. But anyway, whether it's duty or do, I don't want any part of that.
Wow, Zach, that's absolutely true. You actually were just mentioning about unlearning a lot of things, and for many of us coming to grace, it was more so that it was a light bulb moment, but it's a progressive thing. We're kind of learning over time. Maybe there's that moment we can say we finally understood it, but now there's a lot of unlearning that we have to go through. What would you say was your biggest hurdle of unlearning something you were taught prior once you understood grace?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I can think of a few things right off the bat. As I mentioned before, the idea that you know uh, I'm pleasing to God. Um, Paul says that we're a pleasing aroma to Him. Not that we can't please God by what we do. That's obviously true. But everything unpleasing that I've ever done has already been taken away once and for all. And so I remain pleasing to God. He's not mad at me, but he's actually delighting in me. He's happy with me. So that was a big thing. Something, Dan, if we're honest, that I'm still learning. I'm still learning that. And I think we'll learn that for the rest of eternity, what it means to have God's smile on us at all times. I mean, that's the good news, is that when I wake up in the morning, He's smiling, and when I lie down at night, He's smiling because of what Jesus has done for me. And then I think the other biggest thing was learning that my identity does not come from what I do or don't do. My identity comes from who God has made me, who God has birthed me into, who God has created me. You and I, we are new creations. We are holy and righteous because of what Jesus has done, not only for us, but what He's done to us by taking us to that cross and killing our old self off and burying it and then raising us to new life. And so that's, like I said, as the first thing, that's something I'm still learning, because as you know, in one area of your life, you can go, yeah, I'm really trusting Jesus. But in another area of your life, you can go, wow, I'm really depending on this person or this thing to get a need met. And I'm having to learn, wait a second, Jesus, you actually are enough in that area. You're enough for me. And so that's something that took a lot to unlearn, and it's still taking a lot to learn as far as trusting Jesus to be my life and to be enough in every moment.
Well, I agree with you. I think some of that comes into play is that the playbook of the devil has not changed since Adam and Eve to what we deal with today, even with understanding grace, is that the devil tries to give us subtle lies to believe that we aren't right with God, or God is mad or angry with us, and that we have this broken fellowship that sometimes is taught, which is untrue once we understand grace. But I think what you said was spot on, Zach, is that we have to go back to the truth. We have to go back to the reality of our identity, and that's why understanding identity is so crucial to having victory in our lives, because once we can stand there and say, that's not who I am, that may have been who I was, but this is who I am today because of what Jesus did on the cross. And that pretty much just shuts down all those lies and untruths. And that's where we can really see some awesome things in God working within our lives in those situations as well. So very well put. I would say this, Zach, that I think as grace teachers, many times they get an unfair treatment by other believers, sometimes other teachers in the faith due to our stand on grace. I guess what would you experience is probably the biggest misconception that people have of grace, and what can we do to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so one of the funny things, someone recently said it the other day about me. They said, well, Zach's just a grace guy. And I actually heard it through someone else, and it was funny because I said that's the highest compliment I can ever get, because Paul says in Acts 20, yes, and then he says it in Galatians 1, that grace is the gospel. And so what's funny about many Christians today is that they think grace is just one thing that makes up the Christian life, but grace is way more than that. Grace is the entire gospel. Grace is everything. It's not just a teaching once a week, but it's the entire thing. And so, for me, it's one, getting people to understand that grace is the gospel. It's not just God's kindness to us when we mess up, but it's the empowerment. It's the lifestyle. It's the system that God operates with us. It's everything. And so, it's the covenant that we're under. But I think with that comes the idea, that, oh, well, he's just a grace guy, so he doesn't believe in holiness. He doesn't believe in behavior. He doesn't believe in God's justice. He doesn't believe in, he's just all about the gushy, God loves you, all that gushy, mushy stuff. And I think as we start learning about the grace of God, we realize, wait a second, the people who are really proclaiming the grace of God, they believe in God's justice more than the legalists, because we said God took sin seriously, so much so that he had to take it away once and for all through the cross. That he's not progressively taking it away as we ask for it or beg for it, but he took it away once for all at the cross. We take the cross so seriously that we say that Jesus does take our behavior seriously. That's why he made us a new creation. He doesn't simply just say that we're new, but yet somehow we're still sinners. No, us grace people say, no, Jesus actually meant it, that we are actually saints by nature, and that we actually want to live holy lives. Not that we have to, but we want to. And as I've mentioned many times, because of what Jesus has done, we get to live from his acceptance, from his pleasure, from our identity, not for it.
That is a fun. Go ahead, finish up. I was just going to tie in, but go ahead and complete what you're going to say.
Yeah, and I think, Andrew Farley has said it best as far as bridging the gap. And it works for me and it works for many others, is to almost talk in reverse. So tell the people what you're not saying, and talk in reverse, meaning, okay, we do believe that behavior matters. We do believe that choices matter. We don't think grace is a license to sin.
Mm-hmm.
We do believe in God's justice and holiness, and almost talking in reverse, because sometimes we can get so fired up that all we want to talk about is freedom, which is great, but we have to understand that people often mishear us and misunderstand us when all they hear is freedom, 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 because they come in with their own misconception of what grace really is.
Well, I think a lot of that ties into just the legalistic backings of most religion, right? I mean, there's these rules and things, and it's like, it can't be that good. It can't be that easy. There has to be something else attached, and it's not. It's the completed work, but like you said, what I was going to mention before when I so rudely interrupted you, Zach, but really it's that we're living from God, not for God. And that one statement, if people can grasp that, is transformational of how we live our life. It really changes the way we go about handling our business spiritually and how we live our everyday life versus a Christianity checklist of all these Christian things I have to do. It's a natural progression of who we are because we're living from God, not for God. Good stuff. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, let's talk a little bit about your book. I'm curious, this is your very first book you've written. Can you talk about like the idea of what made you come about writing a book, and how did this come to be?
Yeah, so I finished my my master's degree in December of 2017, so this last year, and I was like, now what do I do? And so, of course, I get the awesome opportunity. If people don't know, I work at Church Without Religion and with Andrew Farley Ministries, and so obviously people know Drew, and he's a best-selling author, and he's written books and things like that, and I have a passion for this message, preaching it and teaching it and writing it. And so literally in January of this year, I said, you know what? I want to write a book, and I want to write an all-encompassing book that deals with every difficult passage on forgiveness and judgment. And I want to have that in one package that's accessible, that's simple yet powerful, that a sixth grader can read, but an 80-year-old Christian can read and still get a ton of truth out of it and find answers to a very difficult issue. And so it took me about a month to write it. I would wake up in the morning, an hour or two before work, and I would spend a couple hours a morning on it. And honestly, it didn't take that long. I think I've known about this message and been teaching it for about 6 years now. And so it's been it's been in my heart and my head for a while, and so it was just putting it on paper. And so it took about a month to write it and about a month to edit it and get it all designed, and I released it at the end of February. And man, the response has been humbling and amazing, and it's been a joy, and I'm already thinking about a few other books I want to write. So I'm excited to be an author. It's a cool thing to do, and it's opened up some cool opportunities for me.
Amen, man. Well, that's cool to hear your story, and just how I think it's just a proof of I know writing isn't always easy, but because it was within you, it just seemed like it poured on the pages.